All right, so thanks everyone for being on and joining this conversation. Beyond Business as Usual, a conversation for the Greensboro business community on racial justice and the movement to defend Black lives. Just want to thank you for being here and spending some of your time with us this afternoon for this important conversation. We know that there's been a lot going on in the world, from COVID-19 to the protest movement that we're currently in right now. So there's a lot to think about and a lot to consider, but we're just grateful that you chose to spend some time here with us today. So thank you so much. I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to the co-host of this event and partner, HQ Greensboro. I'm in HQ right now, and I'm a member of HQ Greensboro, so just thank you so much to HQ for being a willing partner and participant in this conversation. We have some wonderful ladies who put up with me for the last few weeks in putting this together that I want to shout out and say thank you to Gabi, Looney, Ari Gilliam, and Caitlin Conover. Thank you so much for just being such awesome partners and helping to put this together. Especially Gabi, who did all the promotion and all of the marketing materials to get everyone here. So thank you so much. I also want to shout out our co-sponsors. We had some really amazing co-sponsors come on and join us just to get the word out for this conversation. And everyone we reached out to said yes. And so we want to just thank you all so much for being a part of this. Launch Greensboro, Downtown Greensboro Inc, Forge Greensboro, Action Greensboro, the Greensboro Chamber of Commerce, NCCJ, Greensboro Jaycees, Launch UNCG, and North Carolina A&T State University Office of Community Engagement. That is an amazing group of folks to have endorsing this conversation. So thank you all so much for being willing to put your name to such an important conversation. Right now, I want to turn it over to my partner, Ari Gilliam from HQ Greensboro, just to give us a welcome to the conversation and share a little bit about HQ Greensboro and why you all wanted to be a part of this conversation. So Ari, take it away.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ari Gilliam. I am the Business Development Manager at HQ Greensboro. I just want to say a big thank you to all of our participants, all of our co-sponsors, and all of our speakers today for being with us. And thank you to Courtney, especially for all the hard work that she put in. HQ Greensboro is a shared workspace in downtown Greensboro designed to empower, foster, and cultivate companies that produce long-term growth and positive social impact. Embracing diversity is one of HQ's foundational 6 core values. We appreciate and we celebrate the richness of difference that exists in the business community, in the Greensboro community, and in our community here at HQ. That's why when Courtney McSwain reached out to us, we didn't even have to think or pause. We said, yes, we would absolutely love to co-host this event. It was such an easy decision for us. We're eager to begin the necessary work to achieve long-term racial justice in our city and hope that you all come away from today's program just as eager. Thank you again to our speakers, co-sponsors, Courtney McSwain, and all of you for being such willing and enthusiastic participants in this conversation. So I look forward to a productive talk, and I'm going to turn it back over to Courtney.
Awesome. Thank you, Ari. And I want to talk a little bit about logistics. So we're going to ground the conversation, but before I do that, I do want to talk a little bit about logistics. I think most of you have discovered the chat room by now, so please feel free to engage in the chat as we are talking and discussing. Feel free to add your comments, your questions. Gabi is going to be monitoring the chat for us, so feel free to share whatever you would like to there. And then periodically throughout the panel, we will come to the chat and kind of see if there's any comments or questions folks have while we're engaging in the conversation. Once we get to the end of the panel portion of the conversation, we will invite folks to just engage in a little bit more discussion, if you will. And so at that point, we'll invite folks to turn on their videos, and then we'll unmute you as you would like to ask a question or comment. And you can use that raise your hand tool at the bottom to let us know if you have a question or comment once we get to the second half. So for the first half, it's going to be the panel. Put your questions or comments in the chat section. For the second half, we'll open it up and have a little bit more dialogue. All right, so grounding the conversation while we're here. Obviously, we know in the news, there's a real protest movement around racial justice happening in our country right now. And it's happening in Greensboro. Greensboro has a rich history of civil rights activity and action. And so it's no surprise that Greensboro has been actively engaged in the conversation and discussions and actions around creating racial justice in our city. The reason that I felt like it was important to bring folks from the business community, particularly small local businesses and entrepreneurs, solo entrepreneurs, I thought it was important to bring us together to have a conversation around how we specifically can engage as our country is really in this important conversation around racial justice. What are the things specifically that the business community can do and that we can really kind of see tangible action and progress here in Greensboro? So that's kind of why we're having this conversation. We're gonna, open it up, really just talk and dialogue and hopefully uncover some opportunities that we can then follow up on. We're obviously not gonna solve the problems of the world here in the next 90 minutes, but my hope is that we can really pinpoint some opportunities for further partnership, further collaboration, and give people food for thought and sort of how you as a business person, you as a member of the business community can specifically engage some of these issues around racial justice. So that's why we're here. That's what we hope to get out of it, and really hope folks walk away with some things that you can start thinking about and implementing in your work right now. So with that being said, I want to introduce our speakers for the panel. And I'm just gonna go in alphabetical order of their last names. So I'm gonna start off with, let me see, I'm gonna take myself off the spotlight here. And panelists, as I say your names, if you wanna just say hi so the mic will pick up on you and that you'll come onto the speaker view. But first, I want to introduce Dr. Jason J. Caldwell, who is an instructor at the Willie A. Dees College of Business and Economics at North Carolina A&T State University. So hello, Dr. Caldwell.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon. I got the time wrong. Good afternoon.
Thanks for being here with us. We have Porshe Chiles, who is the Associate Director for Global Research and Assessment at Wake Forest University, the owner of Endurance Consulting LLC, and the Vice President for External Affairs with the Greensboro Jaycees. Hi, Porsche.
Hi, all. Happy to be here.
You got a lot going on. Busy woman. Next, we have Lou Ann Flanders-Stec, who is the Executive Vice President of Entrepreneurship for Launch Greensboro. Hi, Lou Ann.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here, Courtney.
Thank you for being here. Kris Fuller is the chef and proprietor of Crafted. Hi, Kris.
Hi there. Thank you for having me today.
Yes, thanks for being with us. We have Zack Matheny, who is the President and CEO of Downtown Greensboro Inc. Hi, Zack.
Hello, thanks for having me. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you for being here. Erika Rain Wilhite is the Development Director of NCCJ. Hi, Erika.
Hello, thank you so much for having me, Courtney, and it's nice to see you all here.
Thank you, and I have to give a shout out. You know I had to do it. If you've ever gone to Anytown, you always have to acknowledge Anytown. So I am an Anytown alum from many, many, many years ago. I'm not gonna say how long ago, but NCCJ's iconic program, Anytown, is amazing. And just have to shout that out. I won't start singing. And we also have Sunny Gravely Foushee, who is an artist co-founder of the artist Bloc, and board member of the Greater Greensboro Black Chamber of Commerce. Hi, Sunny.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. So I want to start off by going to Porsche. You have a really, really wonderful history and grounding in facilitating conversations like this, conversations around race, diversity, and inclusion. And so I wanted to kind of get your input to start us off on what are some things that we need to keep in mind and think about when we're having these kinds of uncomfortable conversations that may challenge us, that may stretch us. What are some things that we can keep in mind as we're engaging in this dialogue?
Yeah. Thanks, Courtney, for starting off with that question. What I would really encourage folks to do is to begin to lean into the discomfort. One thing I love about being an instructor in a classroom is that when students are having awkward or uncomfortable moments, instead of just shying away or moving past those, I let us sit in those things. What I've learned is that nothing is typically ever solved by sweeping things under a rug or pretending that it's not there. And more often than not, your employees or your clients, they can sense when things are a bit off. So I would start by saying, don't avoid it, lean into it. In my work in international education, I often really encourage students to practice what's called cultural humility. And cultural humility is saying that we are going to enter into spaces and the conversations being fully aware that we may not and probably do not have all the answers or know everything in that space, right? And what that allows us to do by operating out of cultural humility is to free ourselves of the burdens that we have to have the right answers, right? We have to know what to say in those spaces. And by freeing ourselves of that burden, we allow ourselves to open up and hear from others and really consider their opinions and viewpoints and label them as being valuable. So for example, if you're in a leadership position at your company, are you centering the voices of your employees? And then after you've listened to them, is it realistic that you can implement some of those ideas, right? And so with that space, again, if we're leaning into the conversation, if we were saying we're going to just face this awkwardness and uncomfortableness head on, that does create spaces for building relationships. And if nothing for nothing, I really believe that in the building of relationships or the strengthening of relationships, the more frequently you talk about the uncomfortable things, the easier they become to talk about, right? And the hope is that the discomfort will begin to subside, maybe not go fully away, but can begin to subside. And so when you encounter these areas, you've been able to offer varying viewpoints, you know who you're working with, folks trust you to have those conversations, they know that you're going to listen to them and not just kind of brush it off. And that makes for a great, healthy working environment and one that customers and clients alike are more open to going to and being a part of. So that's kind of my opening thoughts about, not avoiding the discomfort, not avoiding the awkwardness, and really sit in those spaces.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that's such a great point around sort of admitting to yourself that you don't know everything and not feeling like you have to know everything, and being willing to learn and engage and investigate and research and use your Googles to try to figure out the things that you don't know.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great point too about, this is actually a good thing for your business. Mm-hmm. Leaning into these uncomfortable conversations creates a welcoming and inclusive, like you said, environment for your business and for folks who want to engage in your business, letting them know, hey, we're willing to go there. We're willing to have these conversations and we want you to be a part of that. So yeah. I think that's a great point, bringing it back to why it's important from a business perspective to lean into what you were saying, that humility.
Yeah, and I recognize that as business leaders and folks doing the work, people may come to you as a person that's supposed to know everything, right? And so that can be a difficult space to have to admit or acknowledge that, hey, I don't know it, or I may not have all the answers in that. But what that does allow by saying you don't know, for me, when someone asks me a question and I simply don't have the answer, like I said, it frees me. And I make fewer mistakes by saying, hey, you know what? I don't know that. That's a great question. Let's unpack that or research that together and see what we find. And it takes the onus off of me being the only person that can carry this out. And really, again, if it's building community, if it's strengthening our businesses, what better way to say, we're going to go at this together and not just solely lean and depend or seek out only me for the answers to these challenges.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So Erika, I want to come to you because I think it's important as we move forward in this conversation, and specifically talking about racial justice, that we understand some distinctions around the concepts and language that we're using. And so right now, I think what's interesting about this time that we're in is that we're hearing more and more people really talking about and engaging in the ideas around structural racism. There's, lots of articles about how to be an anti-racist. I think the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, shot to the #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list because everyone was buying that book. So folks are really kind of engaging in this learning around what does this term racism, and specifically structural racism, mean versus individual racism, someone's individual prejudices. There's some distinctions there, but I'd love if you could sort of help us understand what the differences there are.
Absolutely. And first, thank you again, Courtney, and thank you HQ Greensboro for organizing this fantastic panel. NCCJ is proud to be among all of these wonderful co-sponsors, and I'm so glad to be speaking with you all today. So first off, I think we're all familiar with individual racism, but just so that we're on the same page, let's go ahead and define that. And that is what most people are talking about when they talk about racism. And individual racism refers to someone's beliefs or actions, things that show up in our one-on-one interactions. So an obvious example would be if I told a racist joke or used a racial slur. And a more insidious example would be if I believed that someone's race gave them some inherent inborn characteristics that determine things like their intelligence or their athletic ability. So as an individual, I can say, okay, like I know racism is wrong. My intentions are good. I donate to charities. And that's, but I'm wrong if I think that my attitude is going to fix the structural problems that create racial injustice and inequality in the first place. So to your point, structural racism differs from individual racism in that it refers to like the framework, the policies and the practices that establish whiteness as the norm or the standard and anything else as the other. And it's ingrained in all of the systems that shape our lives from birth. So it shows up where we learn and work and live, in schools and hospitals, at banks, in the workplace, in law enforcement. And it's also in representations in popular media and in the stories that we tell about our history. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about things like the achievement gap in schools, or racial disparities in average income, or the disproportionate lack of people of color in executive positions in companies. This is all part of structural racism, and all of these things and more are interconnected and woven basically into the fabric of our society, and these things are what works together to perpetuate racial inequality. So to kind of wrap up, here's an analogy that is helpful to me. And so let's say that individual racism is the tip of the iceberg. It's the thing you see. And in that case, structural racism is the 90% of the iceberg that you're not going to see unless you go looking beneath the surface. And it's that stuff below the surface that's holding everything else in place.
Yeah. And so thank you for defining that for us. And I wonder, in your work as NCCJ, as you all do trainings with folks and kind of unpack some of these issues, and certainly, like I said, with Anytown, working with students to try to unpack some of these issues. I wonder if you have experienced a time like this, or maybe your colleagues have experienced a time like this, where it seems like more and more people are really willing to have that conversation about the 90% that's under the surface. It seems like a lot of times we focus on that 10% on the surface, but for whatever reason right now, the moment we're in seems like a lot of people have really been willing to talk about the structural issues. Have you noticed that? And do you have any sense of why you think that might be in this particular moment?
That's a really good question. No, I don't think I've ever seen a moment like this. And in speaking with my colleagues who have been doing this work for much longer, I think the general consensus is that they haven't either. This is pretty unprecedented. Now, I will say that, especially over the past 5 or so years, we're seeing students, high school students, come up to any town and they know so much and they are so prepared. That when I talk to folks who went to any town 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, they say things like, wow, it was just not us at the time. So I will say that I believe that this has been building in many ways. There is growing interest in examining these systems and the structural racism that has put us where we are today as a society, but no, this does seem to be a very historic and sort of unprecedented moment, and the level of interest in this work is inspiring and encouraging, and we're very hopeful that this momentum will keep going.
Yeah, and I would invite folks in the chat, you know, if you feel like this feels like an unprecedented moment for you, would love to hear your thoughts and hear what your comments would be on just experiencing what's happening. If you feel like this is different from maybe other kind of civil rights flash moments that you may have seen, even a few years ago when we were talking about when Black Lives Matter kind of first became, you know, a moniker or you know, sounding the alarm on that particular slogan. It still felt, this time still feels a little different to me. And so if folks in the chat feel that or don't feel that, I invite you to share your thoughts on that particular question, and we'll check in and see what folks think about that. But while folks are sort of giving their comments in the chat, I did want to just do a little historical look back at Greensboro's civil rights history. And I'm just gonna read a few passages from an article that I got off of the digital collections at UNCG. They have a great archive and different articles around the civil rights history in Greensboro. And I actually linked to that. When folks registered, if you go back to your confirmation email, there is a resource sheet for you that has a whole list of articles and just a bunch of different resources that you can check out. And the UNCG archives is one of those resources. So definitely encourage you to go check that out. But I'm just gonna read a few passages. They have an article that talks about the desegregation of Greensboro businesses during the period of 1962 to 1963. And I wanna read this so that we can remind ourselves that the things we are seeing now in terms of protests and march and movements for racial justice are not necessarily new. And that when we look back on history, a lot of times we kind of see things as the folks that did that helped us to make so much progress, but we're living through a similar history right now. So I just want to kind of read a little bit of this, and I won't read this whole thing, obviously. But so desegregation of Greensboro businesses, 1962 to 1963. This was after the Greensboro sit-ins of 1960. In the fall of 1962, memories of the 1960 sit-ins were still fresh in the minds of Greensboro residents. The protest, which began on February 1, 1960 at the Woolworth's lunch counter, had ended that summer with the integration of eating facilities in several of downtown department stores. However, as William Chafee notes, in most areas of education, employment, public policy, and private associations, the 2 years following the first sit-ins witnessed an almost complete lack of progress toward equal opportunity for public desegregation. Many African Americans who had reveled in the victory of 1960 were no longer content with the token desegregation of Greensboro's public accommodations. And so as you continue to read through this article, it talks about the protest activity that gained a lot of momentum from African Americans in the community, particularly students. And, you know, there were sit-ins, there were marches, there were demonstrations, there were arrests, there were, you know, lots of activities that we are seeing today. And I'll read a little bit about kind of the business's reaction to this. It says, in November 1962, witnessed the first significant mass arrests of picketers and sit-in participants, a foreshadowing of events to come. By May of 1963, the demonstrations had reached a fever pitch. More so than ever before, Black students intentionally hoped to send a message through their arrest. Following several businesses' rejection of pro-integration resolutions from the Chamber of Commerce and Merchants Association. On May 17 and 18 that year, hundreds of demonstrators responded with acts of civil disobedience at the offending locations. The resulting mass arrests, over 700 individuals, mainly students, filled prison facilities past capacity, and the old polio rehabilitation center at the National Guard Armory had to be converted into makeshift prisons in order to accommodate their ever-increasing numbers. Want to read one more quick thing. On May 22nd, 1963, more than 2,000 African Americans of all ages and classes silently marched to downtown Greensboro to show their dedication at achieving racial equality, making it the largest march in the city's history. And so that's what it says at the time of this was written. And just to give you some comparison in terms of numbers, we've had a lot of demonstrations and activities here lately. The Triad City Beat reported that the June 7th rally that was mobilized by Greensboro Rising had 100, they reported 100 plus people. So obviously there's some fluctuation there. We don't know if it was 100 or 1,000 plus people, sorry, 1,000 plus people. So we don't know what that plus means, if it got close to 2,000 or not, but just to kind of give you some context, what we're in right now is really on par with what was happening in Greensboro during this particular time in 1962 to 1963. So I just thought that that was interesting history, again, to try to contextualize what we're going through right now, to try to remind us that Greensboro has an active, you know, protest history, civil rights history, and that the business community has been, you know, has been involved in that, has been, you know, sometimes an inhibitor to civil rights progress, sometimes a participant and supporter of it. So there's a lot of important histories, I think, that as members of the business community, that we would do ourselves a favor to go back and kind of understand and look at. So I'm gonna stop here, pause here, and check in with Gabi and see if there are any comments in the chat, folks, things that folks are talking about right now before we move on.
Yeah, so we have a couple. Jordan just asked everybody, he said that his focus is what do we cultivate action around forums like these events going on and awareness events, aside from cross promotions and surveys? Like, is there a way to help people organize better for the impact that they want in the end? Which I think is what we all want for. It's just more along the lines of how can we all focus our efforts to make sure we get maximum results.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Jordan, correct me if I'm wrong. That's what I got from it, though. Yeah.
No, well,
yeah.
So we have some folks who raised your hands. And if you don't mind, I'm going to save the raising hands until after our panel, but if you don't mind putting that comment into the chat, that would be great. I'm just going to skim here. So I will hang on to Jordan's question. I think we'll have an opportunity to talk about that when we get to our section around opportunities. What are the opportunities for entrepreneurs?
And we have one more question too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is related to our conversations later as well. But Mona just asked, how are small businesses uniquely positioned to bring about more racial justice today?
Yeah, we're definitely going to get to that later on in the conversation, but thank you for reiterating that.
Hey, Courtney, this is Jason.
Yeah.
If I could, I just wanted to sort of briefly chime in on what you just shared about the sort of the historical context and referencing the article from 1962. I think it is also important for us to frame, as we're developing this conversation from the historical lens, the landscape of business development and engagement from a city perspective. You know, one of the things that you know, I found very interesting, particularly about Greensboro, if you look back at some data and reports, one very glaring report, one data set showed that, you know, within the workforce, Blacks and African Americans accounted for around 15 to 20,000 with an average salary of around 65,000 compared to white individuals who were over 90,000 within the workforce, but an average salary of more than $91,000. Now let's pause there and go back. So interestingly enough, the city of Greensboro found that there were disparities when it came to the awarding of contracts and business development. And so they did a disparity study and found that there were some significant differences as it related to how awards and contracts and business developments were being implemented, not just for minorities, but for women. And so, you know, there was this one survey response that said, and I'm reading this verbatim, this is from the 2017 City of Greensboro Disparity Study issued in 2017. One set of data showed the highest awards by minority women and African Americans were around 344,000, compared to non-minority females at 1.9 million and non-minority women at 28.7 million. So Greensboro itself has recognized that there's a disparity in terms of how are we really engaging with the minority population, particularly African Americans and women, in terms of business development. And, you know, and I think as we look back at the historical context and we look back at the landscape of businesses that line our Greensboro downtown, it merits the question that we have to be very cognizant of. How many of those businesses, how many of the new construction projects going up are being done by Black-owned businesses? And, you know, we have to have that lens within this conversation as we're talking about racial justice and, you know, Black business development. We can't do that if we don't look at the historical development from the early 60s to now. How much has really changed when we look at the landscape of it? And so we have to be very, very cognizant of that as we are embedding this historical foundation to have this present context, looking at, you know, what has happened from a city structural, since we were talking about structural racism, from a structural perspective to get us to where we are now. And so I think, you know, if anybody ever gets a chance to just go back and read that disparity study, I mean, it's just very intriguing to see that, you know, an award of 300,000 roughly there were other contracts that were given out that were more than millions, but they were for non-African Americans. And so, you know, we have got to be very cognizant of that as we're looking at how we're framing this conversation around business development and looking at creating a more robust structural design for eliminating structural racism as we're going forward.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And I think that you're right. It is really important. And someone in the chat, I think it was Maxine, said, what the passage highlights is that we have been here before. The times were different, but the struggles are similar. What I think we should start focusing on is long-term plans that will root out and eradicate racism. We get excited with small pockets of instant gratification that do not have long-lasting reach. And so I think both of those comments really point to this idea that, you know, we've been here before, we've been here for a while, and there are historical reasons why we are here in this present moment, but there's also data and evidence that we can go back and unpack, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like, we can see the data that's already been shown to us and really pay attention to what that's saying right now. So thank you for bringing that up.
Courtney, can I say something real quick?
Yeah, please.
Jason, thank you for bringing that data up. I know that we, as the chamber, have paid close attention to that historically, and are really and appreciate the issues that have occurred in the past, and are working very hard to have conversations around those issues and to help support the locally owned minority and women businesses to make sure that that is taken care of, and that we can make sure those connections are made, both with the city as well as with folks that are being recruited. So it is a concerted effort, and we invite the rest of the community to join us in that concerted effort. So thank you for bringing that up, and I'm excited that we can continue to have that conversation.
Yeah, and someone just asked if there's a link. Oh, I think someone put it up. Never mind. Someone just put a link up to that in the chat. So thank you. So I want to actually come to Sunny, who is our artist on the panel. And I think we have some more of the artists who are in the conversation as participants. So any artists that are in the room, perk your ears up, because I want to try to, I think artists really can speak to the emotional moment of something in ways that maybe other folks can't. And so Sunny, I wonder if I could come to you and just ask you to contextualize the emotion of what we're seeing right now, and maybe what you're hearing amongst other artists that folks at the Artist Bloc. What are people kind of feeling about what's happening right now?
I think that the time that we're living in is a really amazing time. I think it is a time of just an awakening. And with that awakening, it seems as though people are yearning for knowledge, and they want more than the superficial. One of the things that I've discussed with a variety of artists and being on a variety of art committees is the fact that we have a lot of murals in Greensboro, but not a lot of them have content. They're not really talking about the history of Greensboro or any kind of unity or social justice. A lot of them are pretty pictures. And I think that what we found with this movement and this organic feel for artists to just kind of come and express how they're feeling about what's going on, and the street murals that you've seen in terms of on the panels and things of that nature, a lot of that, and just really how people have responded to it. We've had so many people come down just to take pictures of these panels, and people coming and doing videos in front of the panels, and all of this exposure, because we actually have art that's talking about something that really has content and meaning. And as you know, I am one of the co-owners of the Artist Bloc, and we've worked with a lot of organizations, but one of the things that makes the Artist Bloc so special is that we have been able to give people a safe place to express themselves. And I find that as a minority business, and I think I grew up in Greensboro, I'm from Greensboro, and when I was younger and there were African-American businesses downtown, we have a lot of issues with, how can I express this? Sometimes we have people coming in from the city and they're doing a variety of inspections and different things that they're supposed to do. I feel as though sometimes it's a little bit more lenient for other business, a little bit more stricter for others. We've had people come into our business when we've had small gatherings with coming to look at our paperwork and making sure that we have our ABC license and all these things in the middle of us actually having a small event. And when they're coming in with bulletproof vests and all of this other things that would make people feel a little bit uncomfortable if you're just coming from an event. But these are the times that they're coming to talk to us. And I mean, we've had conversations with organizations where they said that they really, really want to be more inclusive and they want to help us out. But then when we say, oh, well, we'd like to kind of extend our reach. Well, do you have any ideas of how we can become more diverse? Because we also want diversity. And I've had conversations, oh, well, have you talked to the Civil Rights Museum? Have you talked to people at the Atelier? Well, yeah, we're friends. We know each other.
Right.
But we're talking about actually becoming more diverse where we're all working with one another. Yeah. So I say that to say, because I wanted to tap on both of those things. I know that people have talked about, wanting to reach out and help people and wanting to do things downtown. I just wanted to kind of bring a little clarity to some of the things that African-American businesses face that are downtown and close to that area. There is a lot of different moving parts when it comes to that. But artistically, I think that we are yearning for something that is substantial, something that actually does spark those uncomfortable conversations, because they're hard to talk about. And I do think that that is what this Black Lives Matter movement is doing. And I'm ecstatic about it.
Yeah. There was a question, Gabi, I think I saw a question, and I think maybe Sunny, you could probably speak to this.
Oh, yeah. So Jordan just asked another question, and it was right when Sunny was talking about her experience with the artist block. And he asked, how can arts organizations and institutions better serve their communities?
I personally feel as though art, outside of us being the record keepers of every society, every civilization, we're able to learn its history through its art and the culture. And I feel like that's something that as the city, we need to take more seriously. A lot of art projects, we don't get funded for those things. And some we do. Arts Greensboro does a great job of reaching out to a variety of businesses. But it's a lot of things that minority artists are asked to volunteer for, while other people are actually getting paid. We've had murals come up where people in these organizations are saying, oh, well, I didn't know any minority artists are in Greensboro, but guess what? Greensboro, let me give you the exact statistic because I just pulled it up. Greensboro is 47% Caucasian and 41.63% African-American. So we have 2 HBCUs in Greensboro, North Carolina. So one of the things that I'm a very proud member of the Greater Greensboro Black Chamber of Commerce, one of the things that I feel like we need to do, I definitely think that if people are open to partnering with us and for us to do some things together, that's what we've always wanted. But regardless, I think it's very, very important that we put on our leadership hats and we begin to go ahead and find ways of putting money together, find organizations that align with our beliefs and what we're trying to do. And for us to be the people that are also putting out these images that reflect our city and what's going on. But we have to be a part of the conversation. So if we don't have people that represent us being a part of the conversation and not being afraid to say something, because sometimes if you're the only person in a committee, you might feel like no one is listening to you, and sometimes they may not. And sometimes you may feel uncomfortable saying certain things because you're the only person. But unfortunately, that's the time that you got to stand up and you really do have to say something about what's going on. Like, okay, I see we're looking at a lot of different applications, but I don't see any that represent minorities. Are we able to reach out to them? Or like, what do I need to do to help us reach out or anything like that? So I think that representation matters, and representation from people who will actually speak up and say something.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And there was a comment in the chat from House of Wax, which I believe is an artist group. who they commented, would like to know how we as collectives can continue to share the message of peace and get more support from our community. So I think both of what you just said and what they're saying is that there's a real opportunity, and particularly an opportunity within the Greensboro business community, to recognize that we can use our resources, our influence, our position, you know, our space, if we have space, to really invest in amplifying minority voices and particularly artists who, like you said, are the record keepers and can help us document things, but also give space to you know, to understanding and having these kinds of conversations. So I think that's a great opportunity for folks who are asking themselves, what can I do? Researching and finding local, you know, Black artists, other artists of color, to amplify their voices and finding unique ways to do that, I think is a great sort of action item that you might want to put on your list. So I'm going to go to now talking about, specifically talking about the business community. And we've seen that, and talking about the history, and also today, we've seen that downtown really becomes a gathering place for folks who are coming to talk about how to solve problems. Obviously, our government is here, but also it's sort of a meeting place for different neighborhoods. And so I want to come to Zack and kind of ask you to speak to what the downtown Greensboro business community specifically, how have folks been responding? How have you heard folks? What have been the thoughts? And, you know, I do want to acknowledge that there were businesses who were, you know, who had damage done in not the peaceful protests, but in the aftermath of that, folks who came in from outside of the community and kind of use that as an opportunity to do some not so great things. But it did happen. And so we can't act like it didn't happen. It did happen. And so I just want to give Zack, you a chance to kind of talk to us about how folks have been responding to that. What have you been hearing from folks? And how has the downtown community kind of been feeling in this moment right now?
Thank you for that opportunity. I'll tell you that one of the great things that you're seeing, and exactly what you just said, is downtown is everybody's downtown. And people feel that they can come together as they did in protest or just be together in downtown. You can do that in downtown like no other place. And so it proved to the point that downtown is everybody's downtown. Everybody has ownership and we can come together. You know, truthfully, with the pandemic, our businesses have been struggling, trying to figure out what this new life is. And so it's been a tough time. But with the protests that happened, honestly, we're choosing to look at it in a lot of ways in a very positive way. That it brought people downtown, back downtown together. And the peaceful protest and the murals and everything that happened was beautiful. The businesses downtown really loved seeing people downtown. You know, the unfortunate vandalism that occurred the end of May 30th and 31st. One of the beautiful things that we saw was the community want to come down and help these business owners. And walking around the streets on Sunday and Monday and talking to business owners, there were people just showing up with brooms and just helping clean up a little bit. And that helped the business owners with their mental state, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. But then you had the plywood go up, which nobody wants to see that happen in their downtown or anywhere, in any part of the city. But the art, that going back to Sonny's point, the telling of the story, and we've got boards here in our office, and it was beautiful. Kris Fuller's art that she had on the taco was just, it was beautiful. And you know, while we want to get these boards down and reopen our city and our community to bring everybody back together, and so, you know, hopefully these businesses can get some more business, or a lot of folks are preserving the artwork that was owned because they do tell an important story. And so they're being stored, and we're working under the History Museum. We've had conversations with A&T, Ray Trapp specifically, about how can we present these boards. And so, you know, to answer your question is, the businesses were suffering before. The protests actually brought people downtown, and it re-engaged people in the community. And the longer term would be, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do to continue this conversation? So Courtney and Ari, I love that y'all are doing this, and I thank you so much for letting me listen, because this is an important topic, and it shouldn't stop after this one. We've got to keep going and create the change that's necessary.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that you all are working to preserve those pieces of art. I was walking downtown last weekend and I saw an artist working on something, and he kind of mentioned, you know, I hope they put it somewhere. I was like, yeah, they definitely should put it somewhere. So I'm glad that you all are working on trying to collect those. Just as a follow-up, and I just kind of thought about this as you were talking, you know, there's been so much effort, and you've definitely been in the center of this, but so much effort to kind of revitalize and rejuvenate downtown Greensboro. And, you know, I grew up here, and it's certainly, you know, a million miles from where it used to be. So there's been a lot of work to revitalize downtown from an economic standpoint. I wonder if you feel like the business community is kind of prepared, or maybe this is a moment to get prepared for the more downtown becomes an economic center, it will also become that center for social conversations and for social, you know, critique. Are folks kind of in tune with that? Are they ready for that? Or is this moment bringing that to the forefront?
There's no question. You know, it's interesting. Are we ready for it? I am. But there's probably a lot of people that, like you said earlier, and it's been said, that sometimes these conversations are uncomfortable. You know, when some of this happened, the first thing I did was call one of my board members, James Smitty, and his son Adrian separately, to learn more about like what their thought process is. I want those conversations, because that's the only way I can be better. And as a leader in this community, that I try to be and I want to be, you got to listen. You got to hear what's going on. And so, you know, when you talk about business in downtown, we have very small businesses. These are mom and pop shops. And by and large, you look at the makeup of our business owners, the majority of those smaller businesses are female owned. And we have a lot of African-American owned businesses, including Miss Dudley, who's she's been down here, one of the longest businesses that's been around, Dudley Beauty School. And so we have a very diverse makeup of businesses in downtown. And then you have the larger businesses that are in the towers, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's very different. And I think the street level folks, the Kris Fullers, the Vintage to Vogue, the Candyman, you know, they want to be part of the change. And so they're eager to be part of that social call and enhancement for the greater benefit of the community. They're ready.
Yeah. Well, Kris, let me come to you then and ask you first, just kind of, you know, from your vantage point, you know, Crafted was right there in the thick of things. As we've seen demonstrations for the past several weeks. What are some of your thoughts and responses and reactions to kind of what's been going on?
I've kind of been, you know, just in turmoil, not because of the destruction of the businesses, but because I fear the message that people are taking from this, you know, and so I want to be clear. On Sunday evening, when what was that, May 31st, there was an image shared of me crying at my front door. And I want to be clear, it was not entirely wrapped around the fact that I was crying because of the damage. You know, I had been out there all day, providing water and snacks and things like that to people. And to watch something go from so incredibly peaceful and then tensions start running high because of rumors of white guys in militia gear with guns, you know, you can't help but to expect that tension level to rise. I know that I started getting tense and uncomfortable in that situation, which is actually why I stayed as long as I did, because my concern was that should things go south, that I wanted to provide a space to people, you know, a space to get away. And we can fix our broken glass. But I think that what the focus needs to be, and why we're having these conversations currently, is that there's greater things at play here. And those things are the fact that we have such a racial inequality problem in this nation. And so I think it's important to be uncomfortable. And it's important that we have these conversations, especially amongst ourselves in downtown as local business owners, and how we can contribute and help. And I want to circle back to something Sonny said, which is, you know, if we're not seeing those minority applications, you know, we go out and get them. You know, I think it's important that we, you know, find a way to make that information available to the minority community, which is providing resources and mentors and people that they can come to make it easier for those people to be able to access that information. How can I get grants? Right. You know, what does downtown need? You know, are there local business owners that can talk me through that? I know that I would be one of those. You know, can they help talk me through the steps that I need to take? Because often there are so many hoops you have to jump through. So I think it's important that we provide those resources.
Yeah, thank you. Those are great points. And I think it's so important for you to add that clarity, because unfortunately, you know, folks kind of run with the negative aspects of what's in the news versus the positive. And I think it's so important to emphasize when folks are demonstrating, you know, this is to disrupt the status quo, right? So that's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to be challenging. And just like we kind of read in that sort of historical piece, these demonstrations, disruptions, you know, blocking traffic, sitting in, those are things that we look back on now and we think, oh, they were so brave to do that. But at the time, they weren't looked at as these heroes. They were looked at as, you're disrupting my business as usual, right? So I think it's so important that we remember that, and kind of remember what you're saying is that we, for the most part, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think we can look back at history, and several people could speak to this, is no amount of change happened without disruption. Right. Without making people uncomfortable. And I also want to add that, you know, being that I was downtown in that moment, that things sort of, you know, went in a different direction that Sunday night, is I also want to make it very clear that we were talking about 4 or 5 people out of the hundreds on hundreds of peaceful protesters that were there that day. And all people could talk about was, but they were breaking this and breaking that. No, they were not.
Mm-hmm.
The few did. And if you want to, these things can be mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
The people that were breaking the windows were not the people there to peacefully protest. And I think it's clear that people understand that and not lump those two things together.
Yeah.
The people that broke the windows went running clear up the street, all while the majority of the protesters were trying to seek refuge and or get out of the way of what was happening.
Yeah. So Gabi, I think there's a lot of questions in the chat. So let me come to you and kind of see what folks are talking about.
Yeah, so the chat has been very active in the past 10 minutes. And to summarize, we had some good questions from B. Whitaker and Devin. And to summarize it, it's basically saying that, Greensboro is a very suburban city. It's designed to be a little spread out. And I think that a lot of people feel like that downtown Greensboro can be isolated from the rest of our city by design. And while there have been initiatives to bring folks back downtown, the place itself hasn't really had a relationship with the majority of the city. And so everyone in the chat wants to know what can be done to help reach the majority of those people, and what can we do to help those minority populations that may feel isolated and alienated and help them feel protected in the coming back. And I think people are really questioning the diversity of downtown Greensboro as a whole and what we can do to improve that group in our mix.
Yeah, I think those are great questions. Zach or anyone else on the panel have thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly have thoughts. I would tell you that for those of you, that question some things, come down, walk around, and introduce yourself to the shop owners. I mean, if you look at it, it's very diverse, and right now it's gonna change over. And I'm looking at the list right now. I do have some statistics that I can pull up. I don't want to jump off this and pull up there, but the question about how do we open it up to the majority of the city and the citizens, I think Kris as a business owner would love to make sure we're reaching the masses, and so we get more people down here. And so from DGI's perspective, I'm all ears. Like, we're trying, we're marketing, we have events. Well, we used to have events when you could have events. Fun Fourth celebration, look at the pictures, that it's extremely diverse. Festival of Lights when we do it, the holiday parade. And so, if y'all have ideas about how we can reach the masses to bring people back downtown, I would love to hear it. Now, of course, pandemic aside, whenever we can get back downtown.
Right. So I think one of the words that Gabi said that someone talked about, this word protection, I think that's such an important word, to feel that you are protected in coming to downtown and coming and maybe not just downtown, but as an example, downtown, there could be other shopping areas around the city who feel, where people feel less welcome, less protected. Students, maybe from A&T don't feel as welcome to come and just kind of hang out and kind of being their full authentic selves. They may feel like they're going to get profiled. Folks from other neighborhoods, other communities. Are people thinking about this concept of protection? How do we make people feel like not just there's something for you to come here, but that we want you here and that you're going to be protected when you come here?
That's a fine line. Right now it's tough because, on one hand, you've got folks, saying let's defund the police, and so you're going to have less enforcement, and we're going to have to learn that right now. That's a tough one. It's a tough.
Jason,
I'd like to say you're safe downtown.
Yeah, I think I want to, sort of answer that from a different approach. So if we look at why people are raging against the machine at this point, it's because when we define culture, culture is ascribed to those things that are iconic symbols and things that have been purported to be shared by certain groups of people. So when individuals come and look downtown and they see a large center, the Tanger Center, and they look at who Tanger is, they and of themselves begin to say, well, where do I fit within this grand scheme of cultural icons that are now landscaping this downtown area? And when, you know, we have to be cognizant of the fact that, you know, this goes back to even within educational theory, you know, there's research that shows how children of color learn better in environments where they see other teachers or administrators or people of color. And that's not just me making this up, and it's not a proponent of segregation by any means. It's just saying that the research has shown that, well, when we look at cultural development, we have to look at how symbols and icons were used and are means by which people find that level of protection. When you go and you're able to go on these trips and look at downtown Selma or Birmingham and Atlanta and all these other places, you know, some were rightly divided. You had a Black area and you had a white area. And so, you know, trying to merge and create an environment that is inclusive has to be very deliberative. It has to be very intentional. And people of color have to be able to see, and any individual, be able to recognize, where do I fit in within this environment? And so, you know, and I think Greensboro has done a lot of work in trying to be more inclusive and being more opening and creating and having space for that diversity and representing it in those spaces that we ascribe as those beds of, you know, cultural activity, the downtown area. But then sometimes that can be overlooked because we're also constantly emphasizing East Greensboro development. And when you look at like an East Greensboro development, you know, the population of individuals that live in East Greensboro is significantly different than those that live in Greensboro proper and downtown. And so we have to be we just have to be very mindful of the fact that, you know, people go where they see themselves. And, you know, and that's social identity. It has, you know, that's social identity 101. People are attracted to those environments whereby they see themselves. And so we just have to continue to be open and creating those spaces whereby people can come and develop, create new businesses. And, you know, we'll talk about this some more once we get to the education component too, because somebody mentioned, we do have these HBCUs here. Well, what are we doing to get these students, once they graduate, to stay here, take root, and build their businesses and their endeavors, so that they can continue to build to the economic development of the total community. So I think those are some points that we also need to just be very mindful of too, as we're looking at, when we're talking about protection, you know, how are we as a community creating those spaces whereby people feel protected because they feel welcome and invited.
Yeah. And I think too, let me clarify, the word protected, as I understood it when Gabi said it, I didn't necessarily think like protection in terms of police protection. I was thinking more along the lines of what you were saying, Jason, around sort of emotional, like feeling emotionally protected, feeling like you can walk freely in a space, in a store, in a restaurant, and you're not going to be looked at a certain way, or you're not going to be profiled in a certain way. And certainly this, you know, the biggest part of this global conversation, of this national conversation, is around the police and, you know, Black people specifically not feeling protected by the police, but feeling threatened by the police. So, so I think that's actually a really interesting opportunity. And I want to go to, we're coming up on 1:15, and these things always go faster than we think they're going to go. So I want to get to some opportunities that we have. And I think that that's a really interesting opportunity for the business community to think about, how do we create a sense of protection downtown for a diverse group of people to come here? And that protection doesn't rely on police. It relies on people, you know, creating that welcoming environment, emotionally welcoming, not sort of welcoming from a law enforcement standpoint. So that's I think that's a great sort of follow-up conversation that folks can have. But I want to go, Yeah.
I know you're transitioning, and I think it'll be a part of the transition. Jason, I think you made a great comment on identity. What I will say is this: a lot of times these conversations happen, and I think people have the best intentions. And old Southern colloquialism is the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? And so I think to looking at how are we making safe, and I have a challenge with that word because safety from whom or for whom is something I'm always considering is what are we considering when it comes to moving beyond performative measures? If we are only seeking to tick off boxes, I think we are really missing the root of what this is. And that part of the conversation is we're not going to go back to things as normal, right? I've accepted that my life as it was pre-COVID will not be the same. And so if you're only looking at doing things performatively, if you're only looking at doing things by checking off boxes, you're in essence missing the point, right? If you're looking at supporting all folks as this issue, as this conversation was couched in, supporting Black lives, and I would add to that, Indigenous lives and other persons of color's lives, it has to go beyond the performative measures of just saying, well, they came, we tick the boxes. And I think that's more of a root or a heart issue that that's the self-work, that's the doing the research on your own, that's the digging deeply and asking who is not at the table, who is not in the picture, who is not in the history book, and then saying, if I really want to see those things structurally change, someone asks, what do I do as a small business owner in this space? I think you have to say, well, who am I hiring, right? There's tons of studies that show about folks get hired based off their name or their zip code or the school they went to. Ask yourself as a small business owner and developer, who am I hiring, who am I avoiding, and why? And if you can't answer those things, or the answer you give yourself you're not comfortable with, begin doing more work and unpacking what that means for you, because I can guarantee if you're not comfortable with hiring someone based on pick an identity marker, you're probably not okay with them coming into your space, patronizing your spaces, or being a part of the community you say you're a part of, right? And so I'll just kind of, I know we're out of time, but I wanted to make sure I address that piece of it is it can't just be performative in nature. You've got to literally put your money where your mouth is and put the actions behind that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, I want to add and piggyback on to everything that's been said here is I think that the people that are not in this conversation that should be when we're talking about small businesses and the opportunities that create themselves or can be created within our downtown, the people missing here are the landlords. Mm. And I think that the landlords have to be a part of this conversation because they're receiving the applications from the minority business owners. And they need to be a part of the conversation on how we can diversify our downtown. Not just us as business owners, not just us as patrons of those businesses, but the people who own the building that the business is going to be in. So I think that as we move forward, we need to talk to landlords as well. And let's find out why they too have not been involved in this conversation, you know, and are they looking at the applications and asking themselves those questions?
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome point. Thank you. So I want to go to Luann now and talk a little bit about opportunities that we have. And specifically in the entrepreneurship community, you know, you've got your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the entrepreneurship space. After everything you've heard today, and obviously I'm sure you've been thinking about this, what opportunities do you see for entrepreneurs specifically to try to think creatively and problem solve creatively around some of these issues?
So again, thanks. This is an amazing conversation. Entrepreneurs are by nature innovative. And even as we think about the last 4 months, entrepreneurs have been very innovative on how to shift from in-person to being virtual, like this call. And as these needs and the true issues surrounding all of this conversation, from systemic racism to individual racism and everything in between, as that awareness level raises, entrepreneurs should rise to become innovative to help support that. So many of the things that I thought about were these big, huge concepts that I really can't get my mind out of. So if you think about the systemic issues around healthcare, how can entrepreneurs be innovative? And I challenge entrepreneurs to be innovative around getting into the homes or being creative about insurance, or being creative about how to support a neighborhood from a healthcare standpoint, even to the point of food deserts, as we've talked about and dealt with a lot in our city. How can entrepreneurs step up and really support those communities that have not had the support that they needed? And this is going to take, it's going to take some capital. It's going to take some elbow grease. It's going to take a lot of conversation around not just outcomes, but effect. And so I really, as we look and talk about entrepreneurs and educating entrepreneurs and how to be innovative, we've got to start pushing some boundaries and not fully be concerned about the top line and the bottom line, but the social line, and begin talking about social entrepreneurship from an innovation standpoint, continuing to think about investment, not just from a return standpoint for the dollar, but a return for social and impact investing. And I think there are many of those conversations going on, and I think we just have to push the envelope even further from that standpoint. So many entrepreneurs in our region innovated around COVID, and I'm looking forward to supporting those who are going to innovate around these systemic issues. So I think we have a lot of opportunities, so let's start diving.
Can I add to what Luann was just saying?
Please.
When you said something about the food deserts, it made me think of my neighborhood, which is in Kings Forest. And my father is an architect, so we designed the Renaissance Plaza. And Goldie Wells, who was my third grade teacher and a councilwoman and does a lot of things in Greensboro, worked really, really hard to get a food desert over there and to get more businesses coming over there. And what I noticed, one of the things, we really have to change our thinking on how we see people when we're doing these businesses, because one of the things I noticed in that Renaissance Center is the bank there, Greensboro Municipal Bank or something like that. And the bank had bars on the windows. The doors are locked to where you have to be buzzed in and buzzed out, okay? And to go over there made me feel like an animal. I was like, dang, I want to be able to patronize these businesses in my neighborhood, but you're setting up your business in a way that makes me feel like you don't trust our community and therefore you don't want my money. So the same thing with that shopping center. They put a lot of effort into that shopping center, but initially when that shopping center first opened, there was not a lot of healthy options for the people that live there. And the groceries were too expensive. So eventually they changed management and all these things happened. But by this time, people had gone there. They couldn't find any healthy options. They were serving pizza in the back. I've gone to several co-ops in Chapel Hill that serve organic food, healthy things, all of that. But they didn't have that in Kings Forest. So it's like, it's such a beautiful thing to talk about. But we really do have to look at our perceptions of the people in the neighborhood and how, as business owners, how we approach those people in the neighborhoods, because that's going to say whether or not they patronize your business or not. It's not about, oh, it's no money in that neighborhood. It's about, well, how are you treating the people in the neighborhood? Are you treating them with respect to where they will patronize your business? So I feel like that's also something that we really have to look at, because I've been on a lot of different boards that talk about community development, city development, and a lot of the issues is the way that people see people in minority communities and saying, if my child can't work in that business at nighttime, if I'm scared, I don't want to open a business in there. Well, we got to change the way that we're seeing things, because I've lived in these neighborhoods all my life and I ain't never had any problems. So, and I've had people of different races come to visit me and they've always been safe. But it's an idea, just like you were talking about going downtown and feeling welcome. It's that idea of who do you think I am when I walk through the door? Do you think that I'm a criminal? Or do you see me as a patron and someone who is worthy of purchasing and giving you their hard-earned money? So I just want to throw that out there.
No, thank you. And I want to read something from the chat. I just want to shout out East Greensboro Now. Jasmine Beard from the Greensboro Jaycees just put in a comment that says, East Greensboro Now just hosted a recent forum that started the holistic conversation on a local level, addressing community needs regarding food insecurities, healthcare, and mental wellness, along with employment resources last week. For East Greensboro, this was already a prominent issue prior to COVID-19. I just wanted to elevate them because there may be some folks from East Greensboro Now on this call, and I just wanted to thank them for their work and sort of elevate some of the things that they're doing. And if folks want to get engaged in supporting East Greensboro, definitely reach out to the folks at East Greensboro Now. So we're at 1:27, and I really am so just overwhelmed with how great the conversation has been. I wish we had more time, but obviously in conversations like this, you always need more time than you have. So I do want to respect folks' time and not go over, but I do want to give our panel, and I apologize, I thought we were going to have time to kind of open the mic and put on screens, but we didn't quite get there. The next time we do this, we'll definitely be more cognizant and kind of build that out. But I want to just give folks, the panel, an opportunity to kind of share what's your, and actually while I do this, Jordan, you just turn on your camera. So I'm gonna invite other folks to turn on your cameras if you want. We won't have time to kind of take open questions, but if folks just wanna turn on your camera so we can see who's on, see faces, that'd be awesome. But I wanna kind of give our panel the opportunity to share what they think the next best step is. So what's the one thing someone can do when they hang up from this call? What can they do? The next best thing. And if folks have thoughts that they want to share in the chat as well, please feel free. But I'm just going to go round robin. So I'll start with Erika. What do you think the next best step for folks is from this conversation?
Absolutely. I had a whole big thing I was going to share, but it really boils down to relearn the history that you were taught and seek out accounts that were written by and about Black people and other people of color. Yeah, that is essentially it. Go back and re-examine the history you were taught. Okay,
thank you. Zack, what do you think the next best thing is for folks to do after this call?
To pay attention, to listen. In my case, I want to hear what you're feeling, what people are feeling. Like I misinterpreted something that was said earlier, and you appropriately corrected me so smoothly, by the way, Courtney, you're awesome. But just listen and be present.
Yeah. Kris, what do you think? What's the next best thing folks can do from this conversation?
Well, I want to thank everybody that is here and a part of the forum today. You know, for me, it's continue to listen. You know, I was told by somebody that I can't be the voice always, and I recognize that. And so I'm here to listen, but I am also here to use my platform as a local business owner to call it like I see it and speak out against the things that I see that are wrong when they're wrong. And so I will continue to do that. I will continue to listen, but I think that the next step is to enact some of the things that we've discussed here. You know, how can all of us that are on this panel right now come together and bring more people into the discussion that need to be present, and then actually enforce the things that we're discussing here? I think we can talk all day long, but you know, actions speak louder, do they not? And so I would love to connect with the people that are here on the forum that were on the panel today and talk about how I, as a small business owner downtown, can be present and help, especially minority groups, to seek opportunities within downtown and East Greensboro, just as, you know, as a business owner, you know, just steps that can be taken, things like that. I just want to be more involved than just talking about being involved.
Yeah. And we're going to keep going with the panelists and answering this question. I do want to tell folks, if you have to hop off, because I know we said 1:30 you'd be out of here. So if you need to hop off, please feel free. This will be recorded. We'll send it around to everyone who registered. Thank you so much for hopping on. If folks have time to stay on for a few more minutes, I'm going to just get the rest of the panel's comments on this. So Sunny, coming to you, what do you think the next best thing is for folks to do after this call?
I think that the major thing is action, because as you said, we talk all the time. We've been through different panels. All of these things have happened before. I think what's amazing about this time, and maybe it is because of COVID or whatever the reasons are for the reason why we are experiencing this grand awakening and people are listening, it's like, it's wonderful to listen, and I want everyone to listen and to learn from one another. But once we finish listening, we have to back it up with action. And so if you are a person in power, if you have any type of power over anything financial, whether you have a business, whether you are on a committee, whether you're on a board, I think it's very, very important that you speak up, not only minorities, but for our allies and people that actually understand that we're all one human race. And it's crazy to treat people differently because they have a darker hue than we do. If you're a person that feels that way, don't be afraid to speak up and say something and let people know, you know what, maybe we're not getting all of the diverse perspectives that we could because it's just us white folks. Maybe we got to add a couple of different people to the mix so we can get a different perspective than what we're used to seeing. So I think it's just very, very important for people to speak up, to say something, and then to back that up with action, where you really are making things more diverse in a powerful way.
Yeah, thank you. So coming to you, Luann, what's the next best thing that folks can do from this call?
So I'm going to encourage a lot of lenient, sorry, I'm using your term that was used earlier, Porshe. And I'm gonna commit, and I ask everybody else to commit, to really be intentional. One of the things that, and I'm gonna ask folks on this call to join me in this, one of the things that we as Launch Greensboro need are diverse mentors. And I know that that is vitally important in this process. And so I'm gonna ask you all as a community to help us find diverse mentors that are willing to sit with entrepreneurs through their challenges and support them. And so that has been a goal of ours for about a year. And I'm grateful to be on this call today to be able to ask you all to help me do that. And so I would support volunteers to come and ask you to mentor entrepreneurs in our community.
Okay, excellent. And Porsche, what do you think is the next best thing folks can do from this call?
Yeah, I think I don't ask people to do things that I'm not willing to do myself, right? So one thing is, where do you spend your dollars? Those are some basic kind of tenets. What we value, we put our money into. So where are you spending your dollars? I would also say, don't recreate the wheel. There are other folks of a variety of backgrounds. And I want to be clear, diversity does not just include race and ethnicity. It also includes sexual orientation, gender identity, those things. And so who are those folks that you're tapping into for these ideas? Who are you having conversations with? And as someone who is about action, if I can be of any assistance, I'm willing to do some pro bono work with small businesses and say, let's look at your practices right now. What can we begin to do? And again, on record, I'm saying I am willing to meet with folks and do some pro bono work to say, let's look at what's happening now with your organization and what can we begin to do to really look at moving beyond performative. Again, but action is required for those things. Who are you hiring? What do your hiring practices look like? And who are you partnering with? We have amazing institutions here in higher education. I'm an educator. So what students have you tapped into? What internships are you offering? Those are some active things you can do to not only support your own small business, but also support the community and folks that are around in those ways.
Yeah. And Jason, coming to you, what do you think the next best thing folks can do from this call is?
Well, I think everyone sort of hit a bunch of different approaches, and I think the glaring thing for me is how can we work together to really help change some policies? How can we work together to create more opportunities? And I think those are the things that are sort of pressing for me. I've been reading the chats, and I know some people have been mentioning like educational policy and colleges and universities, and Porsche just mentioned how are we utilizing students. Again, we have 6 higher ed institutions within Guilford County alone. We have 2 historically Black colleges within Guilford County, within Greensboro. What are we doing to really engage those students? And I know Lynn mentioned mentorship opportunities for entrepreneurs. I know, one of the things we definitely want to look at is how are we working to create more internships, externships, co-op opportunities for these students at these institutions, and making sure that we're creating a space and environment whereby they're feeling welcomed. I think that's a buzzword for us today. Welcome to stay in Greensboro. And that welcome is they feel like their business will be supported, that they're going to have the support from the Chamber of Commerce, that they're going to have the support from other business and entrepreneurs in the community to help say, yes, we're with you 100%, and we're willing to help support, to have someone like a Porsche offer her services to come help and look at how they're developing their structure. Key to not only just community development, but economic development and social development, because now we're investing truly in everyone in our community. And it is in that perception of, where there's only a certain group of people that's going to benefit. No, we're trying to change that narrative so that more people can benefit from it. And so I think that's, if I were to say what would be next, it would be around those lines. So again, thank you for having us today. This has been a great start. So I don't think it's the end. This has been a great start to, I think, some much needed conversations that I'm looking forward to continuing going forward.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to uplift a few things from the chat. If folks aren't looking at the chat, please go through and look. There's some resources there that folks have put in. The Greater Greensboro Black Chamber of Commerce meets every third Thursday at 6:30. Go to greensboroblackchamber.com to learn more about that. Jordan Robinson says, if there's anything I as a graphic designer and board member of an arts institution can do, please let him know. So thank you, Jordan, for that. Jordan's website is jtrpresents.art. And then House of Lax just put in a list of sort of kind of statistics or disparities that I think we can all kind of take a look at and use that as a benchmark and a milestone for some things that we can start to address. So thank you for putting that in. So lots of things going on in the chat. If I can figure out how to save this, I will. So I'll try to figure out how to save the chat. I think I got all of our panelists. Did I miss any panelists on kind of final thoughts? And then I want to give Ari the last word. I think I got everyone. So Ari, I'm going to give you the final word.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, great job, everyone. What a meaningful and honest conversation. I'm so glad that we got to share this today. I just wanted to say, as HQ, we are always looking for bright minds, change makers, entrepreneurs in Greensboro to come into our space, continue to have conversations like these. And we want to provide resources to you. So if you are interested in having more conversations like these, if you need a place to work that's outside of your home, we invite you to come to HQ Greensboro. We're located on Lewis Street downtown. I especially want to extend an invitation if you are a Black person, if you are a person of color, if you are a woman, if you are trans, we want you here. I think it's really important to specifically extend those invitations to marginalized groups, because that's the entrepreneurial community, the business community, the downtown community, doesn't always specifically call out those groups. And I wanted to do that on behalf of HQ. We want you here. So thank you again for everybody for showing up for this conversation, and we look forward to having more just like this.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, everyone. Thank you, HQ. Thank you to all of our co-sponsors, all of our panelists. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And this is the beginning, as Dr. Caldwell said. This is not the end, this is the beginning. So please look out for more information on where we go from here. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks, everybody.